What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. And today, ladies and gentlemen, is the very first ever episode of The Social Report. Now, if you're unfamiliar, The Social Report is a brand new episode that we'll be bringing to you every single month in conjunction with Trufan. I'm joined today by Scott Birdie, who is Trufan's Chief Growth Officer, and Cameron Sell, who is Trufan's Director of Growth Marketing. And we'll be sitting down once a month to break down some of the most interesting social media news from the last 30 days. And I'm very excited to have these two guys here on the podcast with me. Guys, welcome to the show.
You're amazing at intros, Jacob. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, likewise. This is going to be an exciting segment.
Yeah, guys, I'm really looking forward to this. So where I want to start, so I'll start us off here and we'll kind of go around the horn. So I think we each have two stories and we'll go one at a time saying our stories. And I'll kind of kick things off here with probably one of the biggest discussion pieces around social media right now. And that's the news of the potential TikTok ban coming out of the US. So I read an article on it, and basically kind of the cliff notes of that is essentially they're worried with privacy with TikTok being a Chinese app. They're worried about privacy. And basically I have a quote written down here from this article. It says that the US is now bracketing TikTok with Huawei, implying similar risks around privacy. So they're considering banning TikTok, and TikTok was previously banned in India. I believe it was earlier July or maybe late June, where they banned TikTok in India, and India was one of the biggest user bases of the platform. So I kind of want to throw that out there to you guys and see I know this is a difficult question for any of us to answer, but do you think that with the privacy issues going on with TikTok, really the concerns, do you foresee that it will get banned, or do you think that it's going to end up staying? I know right now they're trying to basically move TikTok from a Chinese company. They're trying to set up an office and make it a US based company, but I'm curious as to what you guys think around the potential TikTok ban.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things here. One, it comes back to the ripple of, even if this wasn't to actually happen, we've already seen it happen in India, and so that's obviously allowing influencers to think about it more and think about, like, is this a platform that I seriously want to devote growing my brand on, or is it something where I would rather transition to, funny enough, another platform called Byte. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with it, but the funny thing about that is ByteDance is the name of the Chinese company, and then the original founder of, I believe it was Vine, is now coming out with Byte. And so there's other platforms that are trying to get to where TikTok is. And if TikTok's having such a hard time with privacy and major markets, are influencers just naturally gonna bounce out of there? Clearly, like people like Charlie D'Amelio, who have very much cemented their position there, they're not going to leave until they have to. But other people that are just thinking about it, is that going to create a barrier to entry? And I would argue so. Like, why would you want to put your effort into something where next month, all that effort's gone, and you got to start at zero again? So that's definitely my major point is, even just the talk of this, I think is enough for people to start throttling their use on TikTok.
I think as long as there is reach to be had and there's a playground for extra space or real estate on social media, there's going to be a lot of people that flock to that space. I think it's more something like, if there's droplings on the ground, there's going to be seagulls around that space. You know what I mean? And it's pretty much the same thing with social, in my view. I do think that when you look at TikTok, there's a lot of interesting aspects to it right now. Like one, like the uncertain landscape around how powerful that audience is from an actual buyer segment side, or like buying power. And looking at it from like an analytics side, there's very little analytical tools to kind of back up any sort of intelligence, I guess campaigns and things like that past the platform itself. So it's interesting that, like, we're talking about this conversation, yet like constantly we're getting asked, like, hey, are you guys thinking about building a platform on top of TikTok? And it's like, if influencers aren't currently able to like hedge a bet on, hey, growing a following, like, why would we as a business be hedging a bet on, like, yeah, let's build on top of this analytics platform and spend thousands and thousands of dollars? So that's also like a point that I come at. But I do think like, man, people are hooked on that platform. And not only for like the views and stuff like that, but a lot of them, like even some of the friends that I have who haven't opened accounts or like started creating on there, they've been watching so much content that they're now like getting this constant feed of like really relevant, well, whether it be like self-help content or like just anything that's going to advance you like personally, professionally, health-wise. Apparently the content just in terms of educational stuff on there is wicked good. And I think it's like as long as that's there too, there's not going to be a shortage of reach or viewership. So it's like an interesting dichotomy. But I suppose the US just could decide to like wipe it off the face of the earth. So
There's a couple things actually. Just I have some thoughts based on what you guys are saying. And one, in terms of like talking about the educational content with TikTok, like my girlfriend gets a lot of that, and I don't get a lot of that. And I think part of TikTok's appeal is the fact that its algorithm is so good, and it's so good at tailoring each person's individual feed to their interests. But in terms of what you were talking about, Scott, with as long as there's like the ability to grow on TikTok, I watched an old interview or fireside chat with Musically's founder. And this was back in 2014, prior to the acquisition of ByteDance acquiring Musically. And he was kind of basically laying out the game plan for how Musically's grown. And it's interesting to watch what he says there and then parallel it to how TikTok has grown. And he compares social networks to countries. And basically, he explains that they essentially manufactured influencers and propelled the growth of specific creators to showcase that if you migrate from one country to another, being one platform to another, you are able to have success in this new country. And it's an open space versus in a place like Instagram, you kind of have your societal hierarchy in place as of right now. Like the people that are big on there are going to stay big. It's hard to grow on Instagram now versus on a platform like TikTok. It's still new and anyone has the ability to grow, and that's part of the allure to the platform is anyone can come over, and with the way the algorithm works, anybody can blow up and have that success story. And TikTok has done a good job of kind of manufacturing and telling those success stories with a creator like Charlie D'Amelio, and kind of on her talking about what Cam talked about. I think it was Cam, where was it other creators leaving the TikTok platform to go to other platforms. Both Charlie and Dixie D'Amelio have some of the most viewed videos on YouTube right now in terms of like a view volume. Like they're pulling millions of views now. So we're seeing massive creators on TikTok be able to move off platform and grow an audience elsewhere. Like the ability for them to cross pollinate has been impressive. And I'm friends with a guy named Sean Does Magic. He has over 13 million on TikTok. And I've been watching him over the last couple months, even prior to the announcement of this potential ban. But with it now being serious of him pushing to get followers off platform. And I think he's almost 3x his Instagram since I talked to him originally in December. His YouTube, he went from 0 to over 100,000. So he got that plaque on YouTube, and I think it's still growing. So it's interesting to see these creators now start to be able to have like, despite the fact that TikTok with its algorithm, it shows it to a lot of people that don't necessarily follow you, and the following metric isn't as important as other platforms, but to see that they do have the power to move people off platform. And I'm interested to see if that ability to sway an audience is enough, to Scott's point, of to actually drive conversions. Like we just saw a couple big campaigns with American Eagle and Addison Rae, and Hollister with Charlie D'Amelio. So I'm going to be interested to see if those campaigns pay off, because we're seeing that they have the ability to drive people off platform, but do they also have the buying power as well?
yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. The whole country thing. I mean, I don't have much to say on that point other than it's a really interesting perspective to think on. But I do know the battle that will go on between like the getting the attention of certain creators, or essentially getting creators to create on those new platforms, and the money that gets thrown around to incentivize them to do so is crazy. I've witnessed that in a couple cases with other social platforms and a couple friends who are managing creators, and it's yeah, there's no shortage of budget for those types of startups. It's crazy.
And Cam, you mentioned Byte there, and I actually have a list of TikTok competitors, and I want to kind of throw each of them out at you guys and see your thoughts on the ability of each one to either one actually go head to head with TikTok, or in a scenario where TikTok gets banned, where do you think people migrate to after this? So I think I have 5 here. The first one being YouTube Shorts. So that's YouTube's competitor to TikTok. I don't know a ton about it, but I know they're going to integrate it directly into the YouTube app. Instagram's doing a similar thing with Instagram Reels, which is they're pretty much like how they stole stories. They're going to try and steal TikTok features and build that into Instagram. There's Byte, like you mentioned, which is founded by the creators of Vine, which originally was supposed to be called Vine 2.0, but because Twitter had acquired Vine, that couldn't happen, and there was a whole battle there. And so eventually it came out as Byte. There's another one called Dub Smash, which I've heard is very similar to TikTok. It's almost a clone. And then Triller, and Triller's the one that actually got the most traction in India following its ban. That's where most of their users migrated to. And it's very similar to TikTok, and I've heard it has the best algorithm of any TikTok competitor. So I'm curious as to what you guys think will be the one that people gravitate towards should TikTok get banned.
Well, the interesting thing is, the only one that I've actually heard of, and similarly to what TikTok has done, is I've seen Triller a lot on Instagram, and you see it with a lot of those dance videos, and similarly to what TikTok was doing. So I would probably say, although I don't know a ton about them, and actually, now that you mention this, I actually thought Triller was just a way to like make videos and you just clip it up. So interesting, because the fact that it actually has its own platform on it, like based off of a social network, is quite interesting. Because with that, I think it could definitely have some strong potential. Even hearing that it has the most traction, post ban in India. But I also do think just the fact that Byte is coming out from Vine, who prior to TikTok and Musically was probably the closest thing to what TikTok is now. And so having, a team like that build another platform, I do think there's going to be some traction, because this one's probably the newest out of all of not the newest. YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels isn't even out yet. But as a standalone platform, I would probably say Bytes probably has the best bet at coming back. But again, you have Instagram. Instagram, the fact that Instagram, did it with Snapchat, who's to say they can't do it again with Instagram Reels, and bringing all their viewers that know and love Instagram so much back onto the platform with Reels. So I'd be interested to see how they roll that out, because they did an amazing job with stories. So I could only imagine what that's going to look like with Reels.
With Byte, I think that what they need to work on for them to get a lot of those TikTok creators is they need to have more creator tools available. Like that's one thing TikTok's also done really well, is the filters, the different the text, the music. I think Byte, that's where it's lacking. And with you kind of mentioning how Byte as a standalone platform is the best, that was something I was curious about. Is does Instagram building Reels into its platform almost hurt it as a TikTok competitor? Because I think part of its advantage is it's a new platform. It's separate from Instagram. It has such a great algorithm. It's just a different platform. I don't know if building in those features into an existing Instagram will resonate as well with the population.
Interesting. I could see that, just because of the maturity of Instagram, and people are looking for something new, like that novelty. Um, I could see that for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of just, I want to throw that out there. But we'll move on to the next story here. I think, Cam, are you up next?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think mine's a little more different, and it's focusing more on kind of what's going on with particular companies and how they're approaching influencers. And there's two very similar ones that I wanted to talk on, because I know at Trufan we kind of have this perspective of building brand ambassador teams and working with influencers on a more long term basis. And so mine's more talking about how PokerStars and Ancestry DNA is using, micro influencers and, larger influencers, but using them on a more regular basis and building long term relationships with them, and how that's paying off. And so, PokerStars, for example, has actually been slowly. I know they've had their team PokerStars for a while, but it sounds like they've been really focusing on it this past little bit. And so there's a little article about it, just talking about how they've added some more players. One being Raymond, who just won a recent tournament. And so the interesting thing about that is you're starting to see these companies shift from just working with influencers on a one-time basis to finding like the top most aligned people and actually bringing them on to form a team, form a brand ambassador program. And I think, just throwing it back out to you guys for this first one would be, your thoughts on working with influencers one time versus, taking the time, because it is more resources to build the team, but the drawbacks and the benefits to building a team versus just working with influencers on one-off basis. Because you see companies like PokerStars really thriving off of that. I know I've seen multiple ads and even the people that are on their team building a lot of content for PokerStars organically, and then other companies that spin off of this, like the Sephora Squad and Gymshark's brand ambassador program. So, what do you guys think? Like, do you think that naturally we're going to see more companies gravitate towards, grabbing hold of this almost influencer market and, putting their brand on it for long term and put in like year, 2 year, 3 year contracts? Or is that something that's really advantageous for companies?
Scott, you go. I'm gonna take it in a bit of a side direction, so I'll let you go first, and then I'll go.
Oh, the side direction, eh? I I think there's a lot of ways to look at the question you just asked, Cam, and I don't really want to dive into what could just really be like a 30-minute answer. So, really simply, like looking at it from a few areas, I think on one end, brands are realizing that obviously influencer fatigue and things like that have existed for a while now. So, there's definitely an interest in placing more of a long-term bet. And in line with that, if you have, I mean, whether it be tools, methods, strategies, a combination of all three that help you vet and identify the most aligned and appropriate influencers based on a number of different things, like whether it be culture fit, the level that maybe their audience aligns with the persona that you're trying to reach as a brand, if they're reaching the right location, whatever it may be, but like kind of checking those dots and really aligning yourself with the right influencers. If you have the right strategy in place for doing that, and potentially tools or whatever else, then you're naturally going to want to place a longer term bet on those people. If you feel like you figured out a good solution that really gives you the best bet at whether, I mean, like it could even just be at reaching the most people, right? Or reaching people 5 times if you're running an influencer campaign across 5 people. A lot of people have different objectives, but I think certainly most of those objectives really line up with a longer term strategy and even starting to benchmark certain KPIs that go beyond likes, metrics that are normally associated with kind of the vanity type stuff and views. And thinking a little bit deeper beyond that to look at like attribution of potentially the sales side of it, right? Even mentions or what can prompt more engagement. And I think so too, follower conversion and starting to pay a bit more attention to like top of funnel conversion or awareness and consideration. But yeah, that would be my thoughts.
Yeah. And I think with the longer term campaigns, obviously just builds more authenticity. It's easier to believe that someone genuinely supports a product when they've been pushing it for a year, 2 years time. But when I said I kind of take it in a bit of an interesting direction, was a company that I think does a fantastic job with influencer marketing, which not everybody might agree that it is influencer marketing, but I think Barstool Sports, what they do with their creators and their influencers is awesome. Like they have a really good eye. Like a lot of people probably just view them as creators, but a lot of Barstool's talent starts off of Barstool. They find them when they're small and they have potential, and they bring them into Barstool. And with the infrastructure they have in place, they can help them scale and grow. And like some examples, like Spit and Chicklets, I believe started as a non-Barstool podcast. Call Her Daddy started before being acquired by Barstool. Joey Molinaro, who's a creator that's really starting to pop off right now, he got acquired by Barstool just as he started to gain a little bit of traction. Ellie Schnitt, she had a decent following on Twitter, and then she ended up being brought into Barstool, and they started a podcast and built a whole brand around her. So I think what they do is interesting, where instead of just partnering with influencers, they almost acquire them and bring them in-house.
In-house
And they
influencers. Yeah.
in-house, yeah, they have a whole list of in-house influencers that they've identified as people that were talented content creators beforehand, and then they just bring them in on their own. I think I'd like to see more companies explore that, is to find influencers instead of just partnering with them. Try and bring them in-house and build media around whatever your company's about with creators that you can find early on.
To your point, I think they've done a good job. I'm not sure if I'd be like the first to credit Barstool of being like a world class example at turning out in-house influencers, because like similar to Nelk Boys, there's not really too much you have to do as somebody coming in new, other than, potentially if you're producing a podcast and stuff, be a great speaker. And it's like no discredit to these people that have built themselves personal brands, but like from my point of view, much harder for Canadian Tire or like really whatever, like a more, I guess, non-lifestyle brand is, to create an in-house influencer that's is certainly memorable to some degree. And like I my mind goes to Canadian Tire just because like thinking even before social media and brands that were already like thinking ahead of those times, that guy that they created that was just like, I don't know, testing products for Canada or something like that. And he was like on every commercial that I can recall for the last, like, it seems like a decade now. I don't even know if it's been that long, but we may have to like check that and like loop back on next month's show and talk about this Canadian Tire guy and how long he's been in, because like eventually he got converted onto social. But I do totally agree with the idea of in-house influencers, and I think the rise of micro influence can also, attribute itself to that type of strategy being implemented more and more, because when there are micro influencers to be had that are more cost effective, maybe even willing to work, at the starting point for like exchange of product and little things like that, you can build on the ones that are working for your brand and really like hedge a bet on those people and grow with them, as opposed to, trying to grow on the back.
Yeah, and to that point about, looking at a Canadian Tire versus a Barstool Sports, where there's just naturally a better fit for influencers and easier to grow with the content that they're putting out. I would almost argue that, they've just went customer centric, where they built themselves around what the customer or the followers looking for.
True. Really want.
Canadian
Yeah.
Yeah, where Canadian Tire is still sticking as this big box store, but you know, um, it'd be interesting to see Canadian Tire actually split off on like almost like a social brand that's very much linked to Canadian Tire, but in a much more social setting, lifestyle brand, and build out influencers around that brand. But everybody knows it's Canadian Tire, but they're taking a whole new spin on it and slowly developing this online persona that is, that guy that reviews, but it's not so much big corporate feel. It's more so like what Color Daddy does, like goes out and just talks as if, you were talking to your friends about gossip kind of thing. Maybe not to that extent because that's not their audience, but in the same sense, whether it's, talking about lawn care and a very down to earth, informal sense on a dock out in Muskokas, um, but putting it in that lifestyle perspective.
So like what you're saying is like to identify the interest of your consumers and create a media company that maps to those interests to kind of get them in a different way as opposed to just purely advertising.
Totally, because that's what a lot of people say, or a lot of marketers are saying right now is like we're all media companies right now, whether it's ourselves or our business. We got to act as media companies, and so to stick as a big box store that's very corporate. That the longer we go into social in the era of social, the colder a corporate company is going to look because they're getting more foreign.
You know what? Maybe like to kind of wrap this one up and like move it on along a little bit, but just like it's on my mind right now, and it was when I saw the article that this whole conversation sort of stemmed off of that Cam shared. uh you guys probably have seen this already. I'm pretty sure it just came out yesterday, but like, did you guys see that David Dobrik giveaway that
Yeah,
just like blew
yeah.
up the internet overnight? I'm
Oh,
sure you
dude.
have. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
Like G
mhm.
Fuel, you want to talk about like a company that
Yep.
kind of does a little bit of a halfway job in terms of their ability to like piggyback on an influencer that was already having huge success. Like they actually have him in their series of stories, their story highlights on a page. Like one of their story highlights is his head. So naturally, like there's a long term vision there, but they can still do like kind of one off, like drop the mic campaigns, we'll call it, um, where like in a day they've wrapped up close to 5 million followers, which is just nuts. And or sorry, not 5 million followers, I should say 5 million likes on that post. But like the comments are right now at 1.9 million, which is just nuts. And I've seen it on like 8 of my friends' stories. Like, come on.
Yeah. The funny thing is I don't think any Canadians can actually win.
I know, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I was
That's
gonna
the
post
better
it,
part.
but I'm thinking like I'm not gonna read the terms and conditions.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing you should do with that story is go to Twitter and search up Ian Borthwick or Ian from SeatGeek. And it's funny because SeatGeek has done a lot of Tesla giveaways with David. And it's just him like emotionally tweeting about this whole situation about how David's essentially cheating on him in SeatGeek. He's doing it in a joking manner, but it's still just funny to go and watch like the influencer manager from SeatGeek kind of just lose it over him doing this partnership with G Fuel.
That's great guerrilla marketing. Yeah, that's awesome.
One thing I wanted to mention on Barstool Sports, can we just take a moment to appreciate the CEO or the Dave that does the pizza reviews? Please tell me you guys have watched at least one of those.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I can't say I'm a Barstool Sports guy.
I know, but if you just watch, you just love the guy. Like, just a classic review on some pizza. Hilarious.
Send me some pizza reviews then.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking about, I guess like this funny kind of way to review somebody or your feeling on something. I have this like funny, I guess, organization to bring up on today's call that I found out about, and they started like less than a month ago. And although we don't really like, this show is not about tying in politics on a regular basis, this definitely has that kind of feeling to it. So this guy, who actually just came in as a lead over the course, like I think it was a week back, he started this organization out of the US known as Defeat by Tweet. And you guys can find it defeatbytweet.org. I think we put like pretty much everything that we chat about in the show notes, so you can find all those articles. But Defeat by Tweet is essentially an organization that was started purely to allow Trump and his tweeting to tweet himself out of office. Essentially, that's kind of their goal. Trump is tweeting himself out of office. It says it straight on their site. And the way they're doing this is, from the sounds of it, there was a new startup that is offering, I guess, like a handful, maybe like 10 or 20 free tests for like a website software that they're kind of building, or a platform. And the platform is all guided around like how to build momentum on a recurring donation basis. So whatever the cause may be. And so these people can choose to pledge between 1 cent to 10 cents, or even an amount above that per tweet every time Trump tweets. And because Trump tweets on average about 900 times a month, well, you can gain some pretty rapid traction when you're pledging 1 cent, 5 cents, or 10 cents a tweet. So I wanted to bring this up just because, like, I mean, one, it deserves a ton of credit. They've raised, I think, in like 25 days, close to $1 million. It's like clearing 800,000 or something like that. But even more so than that, I just find it to be such a unique use of influencer marketing, both from the end that they're actually promoting this on, and from using Trump's influence against him. What are your guys' thoughts on this?
My first thought is 900 tweets a month, 30 tweets a day. That's impressive. That just stood out to me. Like, I can't even do 1 tweet a day on my personal account. That's crazy.
Yeah, literally, like your goal to start the year, wasn't it like to do 1 tweet a day? Have you
Yeah.
kept up on that?
No, I'm trying to start that up again. I've got a bunch of draft tweets saved to kind of keep myself accountable. So hopefully I can stick with it. But no, I definitely haven't done it all year.
Just peep Trump might have some tips.
Yeah.
But on this story, I think that's super interesting. And where my brain went when you kind of shared that link and I looked into it is like, what are some other ways companies can do this to like either gamify or memify something on social media in order to raise funds? Like, that's where my brain went with it instantly.
Yeah, well, I think going off that, Jacob, that's a smart way to think, and B, the notion on how this was built is very cultural and based off of, I wouldn't say Trump's a trend, but it is in a sense of like getting him out of office. Like there's this whole group of people that want him out of office, and so they're riding the back of that, like, momentum of the culture. And so I would say, A, this is brilliant, but then B, to replicate this in a company setting is looking at, where's another cultural wave kind of happening, and how can we piggyback off that to ride that, whether that's we're focusing on another person or focusing on a social issue, whatever it might be. I think the whole notion of how this got started was off of like something moving culturally and really amplifying that in, when we gamify it. And so I think that's probably the best way how companies could look at this is next time there's something big culturally happening, how can we apply this model to, because I don't know, it seems like a rather new model and a very intriguing model at that. So, but yeah, so cool. So cool.
If you guys think there's like extra legal things you have to deal with, because it's not gambling, but to a sense, it almost feels like gambling where you donate this much if X happens, but if X happens, you donate more, right? It almost feels to me kind of a little bit like you're gambling a little bit. So you think there's extra legal hurdles you have to overcome to set that up.
It's a good point. I think the startup, it sounds like they've really kind of created a path, and like they're almost trying to create like a Shopify, so to speak, for like recurring donations, and whether it be companies, organizations, nonprofits, charities that want to involve themselves with some sort of purpose or initiative. But to your point, because Trump tweets so much on average, and they've averaged out 900 a month, they actually cap the monthly donations depending on your pledge. Like if you pledge 1 cent, it'll actually cap your donations at $9 per month. And then if you pledge 5 cents, it'll cap your donation at $45. But I totally agree. Like brands could get behind social initiatives in a big way, and use social marketing to their advantage in some way to get more traction with the types of groups that are already behind those types of initiatives. And really, like I think that's what they're doing. To your point, Cam, about the cultural aspect of what's going on right now, both in America and with the upcoming vote. This in particular, this initiative is aimed at donating everything they earn to benefit the Justice Fund, which is a group of Black-led political organizers working in swing states. So basically working to remove Trump from office, but also going beyond that to kind of defeat racism and some of those underlying issues that are really being caused right now in America. But I think one of the more interesting things, I got a quote from Alex, the guy who started this. So Alexander Schultz is his name, and in terms of why he started it, we'd been organizing and fundraising around the election for some time via a foundation he works for, Galaxy Gives. And he met Momentum, which is the startup that allows for action-based giving, a little over a month ago. They already had a feature where Trump tweets triggered donations to the ACLU. So through the conversations that they had, we thought that the idea of Trump funding his own demise and the ability for people to finally make him pay for his hate speech was exciting enough to go viral. So we decided to build a brand around the idea and have it fund Black-led Black-led organizers in the swing states. It's just like, it's so cool. It just kind of spawned off of a conversation. And now within like a month's time, this thing has almost raised over $1 million. And, it's probably going to spawn other ideas like you guys. I kind of had an idea after this, and will hopefully spawn even other potential donations.
You know what it actually reminds me of is it reminds me of Bell Let's Talk. For every tweet made, a certain amount gets donated. Now it's not from, it's a little bit almost like the reverse where the company does is donating for the people doing the tweeting, but it kind of reminded me of a similar thing where you're leveraging social and using that as the mechanism to raise donations.
No, 100%. Really cool initiative. And one of the interesting ways that they've been promoting it is just by finding out which influencers are already getting behind the idea to move Trump out of office. And really, they just like forward them a tweet and just say like, "Hey, you should really share this." And they've had a number of them get behind it. So it's like it's not really hard to get people behind an initiative that they really care about. What's next, Jacob?
Next, I have one. This was not an article. This is just a press release that I read that I just kind of dove into a little bit, and it was JanSport. And the headline of the press release was JanSport doubles down on commitment to Gen Z and mental health. So JanSport has this campaign going called #Lighten the Load, and essentially what the whole premise of the campaign is it's created to drive open conversations around Gen Z and mental health. And so for people that don't know, JanSport is a backpack company. So this for a backpack company to go after, use this as their marketing campaign is, I thought was interesting because it's brand adjacent. It's not directly tied to their brand and to backpacks. It has nothing to do with backpacks, but they're targeting Gen Z and they study Gen Z and they figured out that mental health was an important thing to that generation. So with that in mind, what they decided to do is they decided to create this campaign around Gen Z and mental health to try and attract Gen Z to the brand by creating content that's not directly related to backpacks, but is of interest to their target market, to use that as almost a form of top of funnel to get them at least aware of the brand. And so they're partnering with different influencers and different experts to do Instagram live streams centered around mental health and open conversations around mental health that they're doing on their Instagram live that they're then posting obviously to their feed. And I just thought it was interesting that it's not directly related to backpacks. They're not promoting backpacks. They're talking about something completely separate, but using that as a mechanism to bring awareness to their company and brand.
I mean, I think what they're doing is allowing, that to really spark conversation. It's hard for a backpack to spark conversation unless it's really intertwined with some sort of story, I would say. And luckily, because of a lot of the other mental health initiatives that have kind of in the many years preceding this have kind of come out on social or other platforms, I think it's caused people to talk about this a little bit more openly. And so brands kind of stepping into the space can really get behind that, if they feel that it's something that they believe in. And I think that this is great. This to me represents an example of what was probably some really well-researched marketing that led them to this conclusion that, both from, I think, a value side, it must be, and I'm not really that well versed with JanSport, but from a value side as well as an actual marketing side and how we can engage a particular generation that we may be lacking in. This would really be a great way to build potentially an emotional connection through conversations and discussion on social. And what I find super interesting reading through the article that you had highlighted was like just in one of the first lines it has here, it was like #lighten the load has already seen unprecedented engagement between Gen Z and the JanSport brand, says Monica Rujali, the senior director of marketing. We're finding 2020 continues to be a year of change, growth, and unity, which for JanSport reiterates the importance of truly listening to the issues that impact young people, working to provide a platform for their voices. So, yeah, really like working to start conversations and listen to what they're saying, which is it's a great way to market. Yeah.
Yeah, it's some good points. And I think the other interesting thing, just as a whole, is actually seeing companies step up on their own initiatives and not, you know, not allowing just those select few large companies to be the ones that are actually doing something for in terms of like social responsibility. Um and because again, you see so many companies now saying, oh, x amount percent is going to this, x percent is going to that fund, but you don't see a lot of actually campaigns coming out that is, not based around their product or not based around like trying to gain more sales, but actually pushing to bring more awareness to something or helping a certain cause or community. And so to see JanSport actually go forward with it, and really from the seams of it, I'm just scrolling on their Instagram right now. That's all they've been talking about for the past what seems like quite a while, month or two, and that's big for a company to just sheerly focus their time and effort and resources on one topic and not deviating from that. So I think we should see more of that. It's good to see JanSport, position themselves with a solid community like Gen Z that might be undermined in the support side of things with everything else going on with COVID and even BLM that's still not directed to Gen Z. And I know Gen Z can definitely feel undermined or not as supported. And in all likelihood, they're probably the ones that should be supported most as they're growing up. I'm, I guess, on the borderline of being a Gen Z per se, but a lot's changing for them, especially in times like this. So to have a company come in, step foot and really talk to them directly, I think is powerful.
Yeah. It's almost like it reaffirms their involvement too within a grassroots side of probably what's always been the like backbone of their business, which is really like youth and like creative people growing up. Like at a certain age, it's probably unlikely that you're going to buy a backpack. You know what I mean? So kind of like reaffirming your interests in that generation, I think, and trying to tell that story through the conversation of these young people. Super cool. Checked out their Instagram page too. It's like you talked about, all about it.
Yeah, we can hose that. I think Cam, you're up next.
Yeah. So, just going off of the first part of my kind of story here. Similarly, so the first one was more like on PokerStars. The next one is around Ancestry Dna. And this one I think was actually a bit ago after looking further into it, but still, like, just talking about the whole notion of micro influencers. And so Ancestry Dna, the cool thing they did was tie in a few different arms of lifestyle to bring together what seemed like a pretty solid campaign. And so what they did was they found a bunch of, again, micro influencers, which is kind of more where the trends going, and allowed them to understand, because if anyone who doesn't know Ancestry Dna, they allow you to ultimately understand your background and your family tree and where you're from. And so they used that and then allowed the influencers to go to the locations and areas where they're from, or doing activities that was naturally in their background. So going to, whether it was like Italy or down in France. And so the interesting thing with this is, again, going back, really focusing on a tighter community, but also like getting a little more creative. And the thing I liked about that was taking kind of a couple strands off of what Ancestry Dna actually is to build a campaign that, otherwise, how do you promote like DNA, or how do you promote, the notion of finding your background? And I think they did a really good job on like materializing what they actually do and allowing you to connect with your background. And so I think, all that to be said, the cool thing I really liked about this was how companies are getting more creative with going outside of, and it's kind of been a theme right now, going outside of what they're actually doing to show consumers how they can utilize their product, or how they can connect with their product on a deeper level. And I guess the question I'd throw back out to you guys is, do you guys see this in any other brands or influencers that are happening right now, where, again, you're not directly advertising your product or what your product even stands for, but going 2-3 steps outside of it, but still seeing benefit?
I'm not sure if anything like immediate comes to mind. Remember that guy who was like a influencer slash ambassador for the gas station in, I think it was like a Montana, Utah, and like Idaho
Oh,
or
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure he had nothing to do with gas, but everything to do with making people who happen to use their gas station quite a bit lives better, and like just create like moments that would be more memorable when you visit a gas station. Like, that type of thing definitely comes to mind. And I think of this, I think more so on like this idea of something that relates not to a brand, but that could be more of like an experience. I haven't really thought about this though from more of like an influencer perspective, and how to like integrate them into that type of campaign. I do recall that this kind of ancestry campaign, and I feel like that's always even been part of their like ad platform, or like the way that they try to generate an emotional response is really by like kind of bringing you into that feeling and that materialization of finding your ancestors, even though that it was really not going to be an in-person feeling. You still, there is something about like, just like when, I haven't personally done it, but I'm sure like when you know who those people are, you can almost kind of immerse yourself into like their perspective a little bit more, and have a much more empathetic point of view for, hey, like who I may have been hundreds of years ago.
One thing when I was reading this article, I was thinking of another interesting thing that they could do that's kind of along the same vein, using influencers to do this. But what if they were able to, using their own platform, find two influencers that some way, somehow are related, and have them, the two influencers, create content and essentially do an announcement about how surprised we're related, but it's all tying back to ancestor.com, and they figured out they're related through using this platform. And then they could generate a bunch of buzz that way by coming out with this announcement that they're related, but they figured that out because of ancestor.com.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Love
That'd
that.
be really cool. You know what you actually remind me of with this campaign idea is, yesterday I was speaking with a woman named Dorothea, and or Dorothea, And we were introduced via Karen, was our initial investor and advisor at Trufan, but she's a badass woman and a boss woman in the corporate exec world of marketing. Anyways, this woman that she introduced me to yesterday and I was speaking with, she actually complimented Karen on her marketing campaigns at Western Union that were involving a very similar concept of like capturing the connection amongst family members that live on opposite sides of the globe, like for that US 20 something like daughter or son of the family that still lives somewhere in like Europe, a little bit more impoverished area or something like that, right? And that like common grounds of like all those people who have been in that position sending money back to their family. She actually like complimented it, and that's when they first connected, and she reached out to Karen because she felt as a marketer that Karen was so ahead of her time, kind of creating that real emotional connection and response between like what's not an easy consumer to identify, you know what I mean, like a Western Union user, and their actual situation, like the life that they're in and the experience that they're having when they're using that type of service. So super cool, and like creating an emotional connection like that is just hella powerful. I guess just like rounding this out, one last article that I came across the other day was this on cmo.com. I think it was .com.au actually, like the Australian version, but it spoke about how or why, more accurately, why the COVID-19 crisis has elevated influencer marketing. And I just thought that was super relevant because would you guys agree? Like you've seen kind of an uprise of digital and just like activations and people posting about stuff, even if it's like more subtly.
Well, I think two things. One, initially, that might have come to a shock to people because a lot of budget was getting moved around. But so it sounded, and I know, maybe you guys heard this as well. Like influencer budget actually got cut because these big brands were like, oh no, we got to pull out of this influencer thing that never can really show direct ROI. But then you see this. I think it was in May, where there was just naturally like a 30% increase in traffic online. And so it's like, why would you pull your money out as to where people are going the most time, which is, spending more time engaging with influencers, which I know we saw on our website. We literally saw a 30, just out of nowhere, 30% increase. So, all that to say, like, if you were to put your money in, you're getting 30% on, more eyeballs per se on these influencers. And so, and even so, even now, I think this is going to be a continued trend where influencer marketing, since we're going to be, although we were doing it before, basing our decisions online, it's now going to be doubled because you're not going to be going out and shopping as much. You're going to be, scrolling through Instagram, hear an influencer that you trust talk about this new product, and go ahead and look into it and potentially even buy it right there. So, I can totally see this.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I think that especially when everyone was stuck at home, the only touch point you have is online. So the best way to resonate with an audience is to partner with someone that's already built up a loyal audience. So it makes complete sense as to why we're seeing that uptake in the industry.
You know what is going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on too is like the more things also shift to streaming for potential broadcasting and live sports and things like that. How influencers become an integrated part of the distribution channel for those types of networks and shows or sports and things like that that are going on. I mean, like esports is just kind of a primed example of like an integrated industry throughout, that kind of channel distribution. I would say, but like you would never previously see like an influencer posting a story and being like swipe up to watch this television show because it's just impossible. But now it's foreseeably like you could have 50 people around the globe, say swipe up and really like have like hundreds of thousands of eyeballs within seconds, for potentially what could be cost effective or even kind of strategic relationships and partnerships. It's super interesting. I mean, like I think it's going to be nothing but a surge of influencer marketing spend for probably years to come with this, just based on what we've seen on digital. And like you were saying, Cam, the quote at the top of this article is kind of referencing a similar thing. Somebody said, March 12th, at the beginning of it all, a lot of clients put down campaigns or put them on pause because certainly not from COVID, but because of the political situation, even with protests and stuff like that were going on. So there was like multiple reasons why it may not be the most effective time, I guess, to go out. But while many brands were on a pause of spending, what followed has been something of a coming of age for influencer marketing. Improved metrics, codes of practice, and the growing realization across brands that they need to connect with customers in new and more intimate ways has led a resurgence, to those categories of influencer marketing and broadening the range of use for it. So it kind of sums it up pretty perfectly in my opinion. And I think that improved metrics and codes of practice will only continue to blossom. We're kind of on the front lines and witnessing that, but yeah, it's an interesting thing to see.
And on that note of it coming of age, one thing that I read about that kind of ties into this is there was a new council created called the American Influencer Council, which is dedicated to sustaining the integrity, viability, and growth of the U.S. influencer marketing industry in a globally connected world. I don't have a ton of information on it. I want to look into a little bit more, but that was kind of the intent behind it was to just kind of not legitimize influencer marketing more, but give it more standards in place. There's a quote here from Keani Smith, who was one of the founders. She said, up to now, no resource has been available on how to best address events and movements like the coronavirus or Black Lives Matter. It's the American Influencer Council's responsibility to support the creator community if and when the country faces the next unforeseen event. So just kind of put tools in place to help influencers adapt to the changing world that we've been.
Wow. It's interesting. It's a big step, it sounds like, but yeah,
I think
I
it was
suppose the
naturally
more
bound
this,
to happen.
yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
Anyone have any last thoughts here?
Some parting words. I'm looking forward to another chat next month and, looping back around and maybe a couple of these subjects that we touched on, seeing how they're doing. But yeah, I think this is going to be a fun podcast segment for months and months to come. Looking for much more influencer news. So I suppose if anybody's listening to this part and we actually put this on the podcast, if you have some interesting news that you think you'd want us to chat about, like send it over to Jacob, myself, or Cam. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, to your point, I think this is going to be a fun recurring segment on this podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I had an absolute blast. I'm already looking forward to next month. And I want to thank you guys for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be on this. Do you guys want to give a quick plug of your social handles in case anyone wants to connect with either of you guys?
You can reach me at Scott_Berty, BERTY on Instagram and really LinkedIn, anywhere. Send me a message or connect. Would love to hear from you.
Yeah, likewise on Instagram's probably best. Just Cam Russell. Best to reach me on there.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast. Whether you listen the entire way through, you only listen to bits and pieces, I really appreciate taking the time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Make sure you go and follow Scott and Cam on Instagram. Connect with them on LinkedIn. I'll make sure their social handles are linked in the show notes down below. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. Please send any of us your thoughts on anything that we talked about today. We'd love to hear your opinions on some of these stories we discussed. If you'd like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram and at My Social Life Podcast or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. As always, today's podcast is powered by Trufan. If you'd like to follow Trufan, you can find them on Instagram at trufan.io. I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below as well, so you can find Trufan. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews we get helps new people find this show, and it really helps to grow the community we're developing here. Put up brand new episodes on Monday and Thursdays, and a brand new episode of The Social Report once a month on the final Friday of each month. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.